Hello everyone, this is Tyler here. It is October 8th and I'm just going to talk to everyone why small countries often don't work for younger MGTOW guys too well and why they should look at other places. Okay, I've been living in Estonia now for about a year. This is actually truthfully the first really small country I lived. I lived in Chile, which was small, but it wasn't as small. And then I lived in two large countries, USA and Russia. There's certainly similarities and parallels with all countries, but I do notice that smaller countries have some things about them that make them both desirable and negative at the same time. And so a lot of the personality type and the kind of person and things of life that you're seeking will come into play here. And it's important to be very honest with yourself. On the surface, often small countries look like great options, and they certainly can be. If you need like a home base for second residency, or you're looking to open some bank accounts, or a business domicile like Ireland or Estonia, Luxembourg, these kind of places are all examples of this. Belgium, you can certainly do that in small countries, and there's not often too many complications, pending that you meet the requirements. But often what is great for business with these countries tends to be negative when it comes to personal life. And I think you see this especially within dating and relationships. It's very different in some respects being in a small country in these types of societies than when you're in larger countries. And I lived in Russia before this, and immediately when I came here I noticed some profound differences. And it's important to take note of these things, especially too if you're living in what's known as an ethno-state. An ethno-state, it's like what we see in Estonia. It could be Iceland. It could be, these are all examples of ethno-states. It's important to understand how ethno-states tend to operate and how they'll affect your day-to-day lifestyle. If we look at a place like Estonia where I live, on a whole tends to offer some good tax benefits for certain types of businesses or business people and investors. But when we look at relationship situation, it tends to stop here, especially if you're foreign. I always tell people that Estonia is truly made for Estonian men and women when it comes to relationships and marriages. It really is like this. What you'll notice often, especially nowadays, is that often what people say is very different than what they do. And this is really the case in Estonia. For example, often the cross-cultural relationships that occur with Estonians nowadays tend to be perhaps like African with an Estonian, or a Southeast Asian with an Estonian, or perhaps a Latino person with an Estonian. You often don't see what you would have seen maybe 25, 30 years ago, where it probably was going to be like another European person, like a German or a Swedish person or a French person. You're actually often seeing something that's quite different nowadays. Maybe guys from those types of societies are really, those type of guys may have an edge in this country. But when it comes to most other guys, especially from the European world, North America, Australia, it tends to be not at all good. And this would be an understatement. Like I said before, Estonia is made for Estonian men and women in relationships. You can think that you bring a lot of clout to the table in this respect, but often you won't be given often a fair shake. And that's just what it is. It's like I said before, all countries have pros and cons, and this is one major con about a country like Estonia. I don't personally know of anyone that was with an Estonian in the past 5 years, 10 years, where they've dated the person in Estonia and then gotten married and had kids. I've known of people that have gone out as short-term relationships and they've dated, but typically a marriage and kids didn't amount from this. It was often these short-lived relationships, which is why I say it may work for some MGTOW guys out there. Even that, though, is becoming more and more scarce as the year goes by. Many guys, I know of guys from Germany, from Sweden, from France, America, many places where they have so much trouble finding any kind of person, any kind of girl to go out with. Very challenging. Online apps are one of the only arenas, avenues that may work, and often this only works for like the very, very top percentile of guys. Like top few percent of guys may have a little success on here, but that may just be like 1 or 2 dates. You know, in small countries, there's just a lot of nuances that people don't really, guys from foreign countries, they just don't really bring to the table. There's just a lot of little things that people look at in these countries. The spectrum of difference in personality is more narrow in smaller countries, and that's also a big aspect here to keep in mind. Even though most Estonians at least speak some English, younger Estonians, it doesn't really make a big difference. Like when I was in Russia, I knew girls where they spoke very, very little English. These girls, though, would still be really excited to go out on a date, to go on 2 dates. My ex-girlfriend in Russia, she didn't speak a lot of English, and we still had a very good relationship. And it just shows so that the language thing doesn't really matter. I mean, most younger Estonians speak pretty good English, but yet it doesn't really make any difference in this country. And Estonian women will say one thing, but often they do the other. This actually is very common in this country, especially in relationships. They'll say, oh, I like those guys, Germanic, or I like the Swedish guys, or this and that. But what often it amounts to is that you'll see most of the girls now just end up with like maybe a Nigerian guy, they maybe with like a Saudi or someone from like Central America or something. That's often what you'll see now with these longer term relationships amongst Estonians and foreign guys. You don't really see, like 25 years ago, I had read, and people told me it was common for maybe Finnish or German guys to have a relationship and maybe even be married with an Estonian woman, but that's not so common nowadays. And I think it's just becoming less and less common as Estonia becomes more and more westernized as the year goes by. And this is a really, really big downside of being in a small country like this. You don't have a lot of spectrum of difference in personality types. It tends to be very narrow, and if you don't really fit that kind of personality type, it's going to hurt you. Immediately you're going to be judged as a foreigner, especially if you don't speak the language. If you can't speak Estonian, you can't speak Russian, they're going to look at you, immediately judge you as a foreign person. And this is another big difference in Estonia compared to bigger countries like Russia and Ukraine that are nearby. Estonians tend to judge a foreign person often on the basis of their nationality. Whereas if you go to Russia and Ukraine, they tend to judge on the basis of character of the person, their actions, all aspects of the person themselves. They don't often look at the person just on the basis of the country they come from, and this is really important and critical. People understand this. This is very common in more Western type countries. They judge often on the basis of country rather than on character and on action and on the overall package of the person. And it's really a shame, because if we look at countries like USA or even Germany, there's such a huge spectrum of difference from one person to the next. There's everything, honestly. If you looked at America, and you can't just judge someone on the basis of their passport. I think it's ridiculous. But that's the state of the affairs that we live in now. This is a current situation in other ethno states from what people have told me. If we went to Iceland, I think there are some parallels here. Also, be warned, do not criticize Estonians on most anything, because they are really hypersensitive if you start criticizing like any aspect. I'm talking about like constructive criticism here of their society. You certainly want to avoid that if you're a more sensitive kind of person, because you will get a lot of backlash. Of course, experiences myself, you have a problem with that, just don't say anything at all, and you'll probably be better off.